My name is Cyrus Cade. I'm a freelance investigative reporter based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. What I'm about to recount may strain the limits of your credulity, but I assure you, every word is true. This is the story of my harrowing experience at the infamous Myrtles Plantation. It was a crisp autumn evening when I received an enigmatic email from an anonymous source. The message was terse, containing only geographic coordinates and a cryptic warning: the dead don't rest easy here. Intrigued, I plugged the coordinates into my GPS. They led to St. Francisville, Louisiana, home of the Myrtles Plantation. As a seasoned journalist, I've covered my fair share of unusual stories, but nothing could have prepared me for what awaited me in the Deep South. The Myrtles Plantation, a stately antebellum mansion shrouded in moss-draped oaks, has long been touted as one of America's most haunted locations. Skeptical by nature, I approached this assignment with a healthy dose of cynicism. Little did I know that my worldview was about to be irrevocably shattered. I arrived at the plantation just as dusk was settling over the Louisiana bayou. The air was thick with humidity and the drone of cicadas. As I stepped out of my rental car, a chill ran down my spine despite the warmth of the evening. The plantation house loomed before me, its white-columned facade bathed in the fading light of day. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw a figure in the upstairs window, a woman in old-fashioned dress. But when I blinked, the apparition vanished. Shaking off my unease, I made my way to the front door. A placard announced that the Myrtles now operated as a bed and breakfast. Perfect, I thought. What better way to investigate alleged paranormal activity than to spend the night? The proprietor, a jovial woman named Martha, greeted me with southern hospitality. "Welcome to the Myrtles, Mr. Cade," she drawled. "I hope you'll find your stay illuminating." There was something in her tone, a hint of knowing amusement that set my journalistic instincts on high alert. As Martha led me through the house, she regaled me with tales of the plantation's sordid history. "This house has seen its share of tragedy," she explained. "Murders, poisonings, yellow fever. The walls here have absorbed centuries of human suffering." We paused before an ornate mirror in the foyer. Martha's voice dropped to a whisper. "They say this mirror traps the souls of the dead. Some guests claim to see faces in the glass." I peered into the mirror, seeing only my own reflection. Yet, as I turned away, I could have sworn I saw movement in the corner of my eye. Martha showed me to my room, the infamous Chloe's room, named after a slave girl who allegedly poisoned her masters. "Sleep tight," Martha said with a wink as she left me alone. The room was oppressively quiet, save for the creaking of the old house settling. I unpacked my equipment: EMF meter, infrared camera, digital voice recorder, standard tools of the paranormal investigation trade. Not that I believed in such things, mind you. I was simply being thorough. As night fell, I began my investigation in earnest. The EMF meter remained stubbornly silent as I prowled the darkened corridors. The infrared camera revealed nothing but empty rooms and shadowy corners. Hours passed and I found myself growing increasingly frustrated and, if I'm honest, a bit drowsy. It was nearing midnight when I decided to call it quits. I returned to my room, ready to pack it in and chalk this up as another wild goose chase. That's when I heard it, a soft, lilting melody drifting through the halls. It sounded like a lullaby, sung in a woman's voice. Heart pounding, I grabbed my camera and followed the sound. It led me to the top of the grand staircase. There, bathed in moonlight streaming through a window, stood a figure. A woman in antebellum dress, her back to me. As I raised my camera, she turned. I nearly dropped the camera in shock. Where her face should have been was a void, a swirling darkness that seemed to draw in the light around it. The singing stopped abruptly, replaced by a bone-chilling wail that shook the very foundations of the house. I stumbled backward, my fight-or-flight response kicking into overdrive. As I turned to run, I collided with something solid, a man in 19th century attire. His eyes were hollow sockets, his mouth agape in a silent scream. I pushed past him, my mind reeling, and bolted down the stairs. The house seemed to come alive around me. Doors slammed of their own accord. The temperature plummeted, my breath visible in the suddenly frigid air. Whispers echoed from every shadow, a cacophony of disembodied voices pleading, threatening, weeping. I burst out of the front door, gasping for breath. As I looked back at the house, every window blazed with an otherworldly light. Silhouettes moved behind the curtains, dozens of them, more than the house could possibly hold. I spent the rest of the night in my car, too terrified to leave, too stubborn to simply drive away. When dawn finally broke, I steeled myself to retrieve my belongings from the room. Martha met me at the door, looking fresh and cheerful. "Sleep well?" she asked, a knowing glint in her eye. I mumbled something non-committal and hurried to my room. Everything was as I had left it, except for one chilling detail. On the antique writing desk lay a piece of parchment that hadn't been there before. Written in what looked disturbingly like dried blood were two words: "Help us." I grabbed my bags and practically ran from the house, Martha's laughter following me down the driveway. As I sped away from the Myrtles Plantation, I glanced in my rearview mirror. For a split second, I saw not the stately white mansion, but a decrepit ruin, its windows dark and empty, its paint peeling to reveal rotting wood beneath. Then I blinked, and it was gone. Now, I sit here in my Minneapolis apartment, trying to make sense of what I experienced. The rational part of my mind wants to dismiss it all as an elaborate hoax, a vivid nightmare brought on by suggestion and an overactive imagination. But then I remember the parchment, which I still have, locked away in a safe deposit box. I remember the bone-deep cold, the wail that seemed to come from another world. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to my core, that there are things in this world beyond our understanding. The Myrtles Plantation guards its secrets well. But one thing is clear: the dead do not rest easy there, and neither, I fear, will I ever again. But my encounter at the Myrtles was far from over. In fact, it was just the beginning of a nightmare that would follow me back to Minneapolis and beyond. As I settled back into my routine in the Twin Cities, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me home. It started small: objects moving when I wasn't looking, the sensation of being watched when I was alone in my apartment. I chalked it up to paranoia, a lingering effect of my experience in Louisiana. But then things escalated. One night, as I was reviewing the footage from the Myrtles, I noticed something in the background of a shot I'd taken in Chloe's room. There, in the mirror, was a face, not my own, but that of a young woman with dark, haunted eyes. I froze the frame, my blood running cold. It was the same face I'd seen in my rearview mirror as I fled the plantation. I spent the next few days poring over historical records, trying to identify the woman. My search led me to the story of Octavia Woodruff, daughter of the plantation's owners in the early 19th century. Octavia had died young, officially of yellow fever, but rumors persisted of a darker fate. As I dug deeper into Octavia's story, strange occurrences in my apartment intensified. Books would fly off shelves. At night, I'd wake to the sound of a woman weeping, only to find my apartment empty. The temperature would plummet in specific areas, my breath visible in isolated pockets of frigid air. Desperate for answers, I reached out to Dr. Eleanor Vance, a parapsychologist at the University of Minnesota. Initially skeptical, Dr. Vance became intrigued as I recounted my experiences and showed her my evidence. "It seems," she said, peering at me over her glasses, "that you've brought something back with you, Mr. Cade, something that doesn't want to let go." Dr. Vance agreed to come to my apartment to conduct an investigation. The night she arrived, the paranormal activity reached a fever pitch. As soon as she crossed the threshold, every electronic device in the apartment went haywire. The lights flickered, and a high-pitched whine emanated from the television. "It's agitated," Dr. Vance murmured, her eyes wide. "Whatever it is, it knows we're trying to communicate with it." We set up cameras and sensors throughout the apartment. For hours, nothing happened. Then, just as we were about to call it a night, the temperature dropped precipitously. Our breath clouded the air as frost formed on the windows in July. "Octavia?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Are you here?" The response was immediate and terrifying. A gust of wind tore through the apartment, scattering papers and knocking over furniture. In the midst of the maelstrom, a figure began to materialize, a young woman in antebellum dress, her form translucent and shifting. Dr. Vance gasped, "It's her," she whispered. "It's really her." The apparition of Octavia Woodruff stood before us, her eyes filled with a profound sadness. When she spoke, her voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You opened a door," she said, her words echoing with an otherworldly resonance. "Now you must help us close it." "Close what?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "The veil between worlds," Octavia replied. "It's thinning at the Myrtles. You must return. You must set us free." With those words, Octavia's form began to dissipate. The wind died down, the temperature slowly returned to normal. Dr. Vance and I looked at each other, shaken to our cores. "What just happened?" I asked. Dr. Vance shook her head, her scientific skepticism warring with what she had just witnessed. "I'm not sure," she admitted, "but I think you've been given a mission, Mr. Cade. One that you can't ignore." I knew she was right. Whatever forces I had unwittingly set in motion at the Myrtles Plantation, I was now responsible for dealing with them. The next morning, I booked a flight back to Louisiana, my mind racing with questions and fears. The Myrtles looked exactly as I remembered it, stately, beautiful, and utterly terrifying. Martha greeted me at the door, unsurprised by my return. "We've been expecting you," she said, her enigmatic smile sending a shiver down my spine. As night fell, I found myself once again prowling the halls of the plantation house, this time with a purpose. I wasn't just investigating anymore. I was on a mission to set trapped souls free. In the dead of night, I made my way to the room where I had first encountered Octavia's spirit. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the very house was holding its breath. I stood in the center of the room, my heart pounding. "I'm here," I called out. "I'm ready to help." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The room filled with a swirling mist, and from it emerged not just Octavia, but a host of spectral figures, men, women, and children from various eras, all bearing the marks of their tragic ends. Octavia stepped forward, her form more solid than before. "The veil has grown thin," she said, her voice resonating with otherworldly power. "For too long, we have been trapped between worlds. You must help us pass over." "How?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "There is a ritual," Octavia explained, "one that requires a living soul to guide the dead. But be warned, it comes at a great cost." I swallowed hard, steeling myself. "Tell me what I need to do." What followed was a night of terror and wonder, unlike anything I had ever experienced. Under Octavia's guidance, I performed an ancient ritual, calling upon forces I didn't understand and could barely control. The very fabric of reality seemed to warp around us as I recited incantations in languages long dead. As the ritual reached its climax, the spirits began to fade, one by one. I could feel their gratitude, their relief as they finally found peace. But with each passing soul, I felt a piece of myself slipping away. Just before dawn, as the last spirit prepared to cross over, I realized the true cost of the ritual. In order to free these souls, I would have to take their place, a living anchor in a sea of restless dead. Octavia's eyes met mine, filled with sorrow and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered as she began to fade, "and I'm sorry." As the sun rose over the Myrtles Plantation, I found myself alone in the room, forever changed. The spirits were gone, the veil between worlds restored, but a part of me remained trapped, tethered to this place of tragedy and loss. Now, as I conclude this account, I do so not from my apartment in Minneapolis, but from a room in the Myrtles Plantation. I am both guest and guardian, a living man with one foot in the world of the dead. My days are spent guiding tourists through the house, recounting sanitized versions of its history. But at night, when the visitors have gone and the house grows quiet, I walk its halls, ensuring that the veil remains intact, that no other souls become trapped as those before them were. Some might call it a curse, this half-life I now lead. But as I look out over the misty grounds of the plantation, feeling the weight of its history and the echoes of those I helped set free, I can't help but feel a sense of purpose. I am Cyrus Cade, journalist turned gatekeeper, the reluctant guardian of the Myrtles Plantation. And this is where my story truly begins. But even as I settled into my new role as guardian of the Myrtles, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. Deeper, darker secrets yet to be uncovered. The ritual that had set the spirits free and bound me to this place had opened my eyes to a hidden world, one that existed alongside our own, but remained invisible to most. As weeks turned into months, I began to notice patterns in the paranormal activity that still occasionally rippled through the plantation. It wasn't random, as I had first believed, but seemed to follow a complex rhythm, like the ebb and flow of an otherworldly tide. My investigation led me to the plantation's extensive library, where I discovered a hidden compartment containing a collection of arcane texts. Among them was a journal belonging to Octavia Woodruff's mother, Sarah. As I pored over its yellowed pages, a chilling truth began to emerge. The Woodruff family, it seemed, had not been innocent victims of tragic circumstance. They had been practitioners of a dark and ancient magic, using the plantation as a focal point for rituals that tapped into the boundary between life and death. The deaths that had occurred here, including those of Sarah's own children, had been sacrifices meant to strengthen their hold on these eldritch forces. But something had gone wrong. The final ritual, meant to grant the Woodruffs immortality, had instead trapped their souls in a limbo between worlds. It was this cosmic mistake that had turned the Myrtles into a paranormal hotspot, drawing in and ensnaring other lost souls over the decades. Armed with this knowledge, I realized that my work was far from over. The ritual I had performed had freed the trapped spirits, yes, but it had not addressed the root cause of the haunting. The Myrtles itself was a wound in the fabric of reality, one that needed to be healed. I threw myself into studying Sarah Woodruff's journal, learning the intricacies of the magic she had wielded. It was dangerous knowledge, the kind that could corrupt one's very soul if misused. But I knew it was necessary if I was to truly put things right. As I delved deeper into these esoteric arts, I began to change. My perceptions shifted, allowing me to see beyond the veil even in my waking hours. The plantation revealed new secrets to me, layers of its history that had been hidden in plain sight. The walls seemed to whisper their stories. The floorboards groaned with memories of lives long past, and the very air carried the weight of centuries of sorrow. I could see them now, the echoes of those who had lived and died here. They moved through the house like shadows, unaware of my presence, replaying moments of their lives in an endless loop. But there was something else, something darker. A presence that lurked just beyond the edges of my perception, watching, waiting. It wasn't like the other spirits I had encountered. This was something ancient, malevolent, and hungry. I began to suspect that this entity was the true source of the Myrtles' curse, the force that had ensnared the Woodruffs and all who came after them. I knew I couldn't confront it alone. I reached out to Dr. Eleanor Vance once more, sharing with her what I had discovered. She was hesitant at first. Dabbling in arcane rituals was far outside her realm of expertise, but eventually her curiosity and sense of duty won out. When she arrived at the plantation, she brought with her a team of researchers and an arsenal of equipment designed to measure and document paranormal phenomena. Together, we set out to uncover the truth about the entity that haunted this place. Our investigation led us to a hidden chamber beneath the house, accessible only through a trapdoor concealed beneath a rug in the parlor. The air in the chamber was suffocatingly stale, and the walls were lined with strange symbols etched into the stone, symbols that matched those in Sarah Woodruff's journal. At the center of the room stood an altar, blackened with age and stained with what could only be blood. It was here we realized that the Woodruffs had conducted their rituals, and it was here that we would have to confront whatever they had unleashed. Dr. Vance and her team set up their equipment, while I prepared for what I knew would be a dangerous confrontation. Using Sarah's journal as my guide, I began to draw a protective circle around the altar, inscribing it with sigils meant to ward off malevolent spirits. The air grew colder with every stroke of chalk, and an oppressive silence fell over the room. As I lit the candles around the circle and began to chant the incantation from Sarah's journal, the ground beneath us trembled. The symbols on the walls began to glow with an eerie green light, and a low growl echoed through the chamber, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then it appeared. The entity emerged from the shadows like smoke coalescing into form. It was massive, its shape constantly shifting as though it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Its eyes, if you could call them that, were twin voids that seemed to pull at my very soul. "You dare summon me?" it hissed, its voice a cacophony of whispers layered over a deep rumble. "We're here to end this," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "You've caused enough suffering." The entity laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine and made my stomach churn. "Foolish mortal," it said. "You think you can banish me? I am older than your pitiful species. This place is mine." It lunged toward me, but as it crossed into the protective circle, it recoiled with a deafening roar. The sigils flared brightly, holding it at bay, for now. Dr. Vance and her team worked frantically to document what was happening while I continued the ritual. The words felt like fire on my tongue, each syllable draining me of energy as I channeled every ounce of willpower into keeping the entity contained. But then something went wrong. One of Dr. Vance's assistants, a young man named Peter, panicked and stepped too close to the edge of the circle. In an instant, the entity lashed out, dragging him beyond the protective barrier. His screams were cut short as he was consumed by darkness. The circle began to falter, its light flickering like a dying flame. The entity grew stronger, its form solidifying as it fed on Peter's life force. "Finish it," Dr. Vance shouted over the cacophony. I pushed through my fear and exhaustion, reciting the final lines of the incantation with everything I had left. The room shook violently as a blinding light erupted from the altar, engulfing us all. When I opened my eyes, I found myself lying on the floor of the chamber. The entity was gone, or so it seemed, but so were Dr. Vance and her team. The room was eerily silent once more, save for my own ragged breathing. I stumbled out of the chamber and into the daylight above ground, disoriented and alone. The plantation felt different now, lighter somehow, but also emptier. It was as if whatever had haunted this place for centuries had finally been purged, but at a terrible cost. In time, I would come to learn that Dr. Vance and her team had vanished without a trace. Their equipment remained in the chamber below, but there was no sign of their bodies or any indication of where they might have gone. As for me, well, let's just say that my encounter with that entity left its mark. Sometimes at night, when all is quiet and dark, I feel its presence lingering just beyond my perception, a reminder that some doors are better left unopened. I still live at the Myrtles Plantation, tending to its grounds and sharing its history with curious visitors who come seeking ghost stories and thrills. But I no longer tell them everything I know about this place or what lies beneath it. Some truths are too dangerous to share, and some nightmares never truly end.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.